City of Rollingwood City Council meeting for Wednesday, January 15th, 2020 at 7 o'clock. And members call the roll.
Wendy Headley,
Buck Shapiro.
Amy Patillo.
Sarah Hudson.
Charlie Zeck.
Amber Lewis.
Gavin Massengill. And we will go directly into public comment on items not on the agenda. Do we have any? No one? Okay, no public comments. And we'll move on to agenda item regarding public hearings. And call up item number 2, public hearing, discussion, and possible action on an ordinance amending the city's Code of Ordinances, section 12.06, to prohibit the operation of motor-assisted scooters in the city, providing for a penalty of up to $500 per day for a violation of this ordinance, providing for severability and an effective date. Wendy?
Open up the public hearing and state.
Oh, I'm sorry. And we will go into public hearing at 7:02. Is there anyone who's wishing to testify on this agenda item? All right, hearing none, we will close the public hearing at 7:02 and move to go to item 3.
No,
Or do you wanna go ahead?
now you can go into discussion and possible action.
Wendy, do you want to brief us on where we are with this issue?
So, I think we were supposed to have an update on possibly proposing just the ban of commercial scooters, but in the packet, it looks like it's still,
Right,
on.
we
This one is
apologize.
updated. The one in the packet was.
Oh,
wrong.
okay.
We
Yeah, 'cause
apologize,
I
we
read
put in the
packet too, and I was
old
like,
art ordinance, but you have a printed copy of the commercially owned differentiation between, privately owned and commercially owned scooters, and it would ban commercially owned
Correct.
scooters.
Okay. So just at our last council discussions, I got the sense that there wasn't, that the council may not be moving in the direction of wanting to ban scooters outright. And when I was reading through the ordinance, that is, presented here tonight, I saw that as opposed to prohibiting it, that we could at least, put it into the code, and strike out where it says prohibit and just regulate scooters in the same way that we're regulating, bikes, but they would give us a way to impound them if they're abandoned in the city. And, if they're abandoned in any public place, as defined here, public sidewalk, public property, public park, public way, public street, or a highway within the city, and abandoned there, they can be impounded. But if, for instance, a resident took the scooter downtown, to their house and had it parked in their own driveway and it's authorized by them, then it wouldn't be a problem because it'd be on their own property. So that could be one way that we could consider, the issue of the worry that scooters may be abandoned. And then if somebody's caught abandoning it and leaving it, then they could be fined. So that would be something I just wanted to bring up as a possible discussion topic for tonight, if that's the direction, or instead of an outright ban that the council might want to go in.
Allows all other scooters, and if any scooter, regardless of whether or not it's commercial.
So, a simple way to fix that would be then maybe to remove A. And there's a definition of commercially owned now that was added, it looks like, but
But it's not complete.
I'm only
Yeah.
seeing it.
So anywhere where it says prohibition,
The
we could change
definition
it
of
to.
commercially owned is not complete.
Why is it not complete?
Scooter which is owned for the purpose of rental or other commercial.
Yeah,
Oh,
we'd
activity,
almost wanna
okay.
just go back to the ordinance the
Oh,
way it was
purposes.
before commercial, that was actually in the packet
That's easy to
at the
fix.
first part, and just have it apply to all scooters, just in case somebody abandons a regular scooter, we could impound it.
Yeah.
But yeah, Amy, like you said, Amy, we could strike A, in section 12.06.006, we could strike A, and then we could name the section, prohibition of abandoning motor-assisted scooters. And then anywhere where it says, in the first part, the whereas, we could just strike prohibiting, and in the ordinance itself, where we prohibit the operation of motor-assisted scooters, we could just prohibit the abandonment of motor-assisted scooters. So I just kind of went through and redlined the ordinance that was in there that was not the commercial ordinance. If that sounds like something we might be interested in.
I think that, that would be something, a direction that I think I would be more comfortable with. I think that'd be a good compromise.
I feel the same way.
To me, it seems like if we're gonna do that, we need to add something, because the way this is worded, it doesn't prohibit somebody from abandoning a scooter in my front yard.
Yeah, so we would probably want to say, in E, we'd want to say, the city may impound any motor-assisted scooter found unattended at any public sidewalk, and then we could add to that section that says public, all the public places, we could say, or unauthorized private property.
I mean, cause that, to me, we don't have hardly any public sidewalks, so it would be most likely in the park, which we would wanna address, but I would think it's more likely that people are gonna drop it in somebody's front yard,
Right.
which we would want to address also.
And the first 10 feet is public right-of-way, so unless they walk it up further, but I think you're right, I made a note of that we would want to say any authorized
Well, then we
Private.
would,
property.
then we should clarify this to say public right-of-way, because the way, right now it just says public way, and I read that and I go, I don't know what that means.
Okay.
I think maybe a definition of abandonment might be appropriate as well.
And we could maybe ask for legal counsel to draft it up the way that we're talking about it, so it just looks good, and then bring it back next month complete, and
Are you taking
then
notes?
vote on it then.
And what I'm thinking on the definition of abandonment, there probably needs to be some sort of time component.
They have a 72-hour.
Or did I miss that?
Yeah,
It's
so
under EB.
yeah,
and
B
then
and C
C.
have the. And then also agenda item 14. When we get there, we're talking about the
Dockless bike.
dockless vehicles. So I'm wondering if we could, since we're calling it dockless vehicles, we could add in a definition for motor-assisted scooters, and so that we could regulate adding permits for companies that want to bring those into the city as well. When we get there. Or we could put it on the next month's agenda if that's more appropriate.
But we can also just prohibit the abandonment and then that allows people who have a
Any kind of-
personal one to use it. They just can't abandon it in public spaces, but it doesn't allow a permitting opportunity for commercially owned scooters to come into the city, which would potentially incentivize, I don't know what kind of business model that creates. Like, I don't know if that means that the scooter companies start putting a radius and actually, instead of just slowing down the scooters when they come in the city, actually stopping them from functioning, or what happens?
Didn't the bike ordinance allow us to have two of the bikes could get permits in the city? So we could put the same limits on the dockless scooters where only two companies could bring the scooters in and have to get permits to do it? So we would know if it's not one of those two companies that they're not permitted in it. I mean, maybe it's too hard to enforce, I don't know. But the permit, to me, would help to cover the expenses, administrative expenses, and any kind of police time and expenses that may get incurred with having to impound scooters. And the impoundment fee is supposed to cover that as well.
I think we don't realistically have any place that a company would be bringing scooters in to leave for people to rent. Because I would hope they're not trying to bring something into a facility on Bee Caves Road, because having scooters on Bee Caves Road just seems not like a good idea. And we don't really have a good place or reason, I wouldn't think, for too many people to be renting scooters in Rollingwood. It seems like it would be more likely that we would have people renting a scooter someplace else and coming into Rollingwood. And so if we put a limit on who can bring scooters in, that seems harder to enforce because it's not the company that's bringing it in, it's the riders.
Right. Maybe
And
we don't
so-
necessarily wanna have spots where they can leave scooters, but maybe just allow residents to use them if they want to bring them back and have people over.
Right. So if you put a limit on how many people can get permits, that would allow somebody to bring a scooter in here, then we would just be limiting the income from the permit, and it would be hard to enforce
Yeah.
because,
If there's no reason to do it, to add them in number 14, that's fine with me, but if there's some reason that we'd want to add them the same way we have dockless bikes, then that was just the note.
I'm just talking about having a limit on how many could get it. Because I don't think we're gonna have, 5 scooter companies wanting to bring scooters in and leaving them here in Rollingwood. It's more the bringing them in.
So, can I ask a question so that I can catch up? So what's in front of you currently is simply an ordinance to prohibit commercial scooters and then also prohibit any scooter, well, you can't use commercial, so it wouldn't come into play, but prohibit someone from taking their personal scooter and just leaving it in the city street or the public right of way or whatever. That's all this does. So now I'm hearing talk about, now we're wanting to treat these the same way we treat dockless bikes, which is allow commercial scooters, but permit them in a way that's similar that we permit dockless bikes. Is that what I'm hearing?
So the discussion was not banning them, allowing them within the city, and having a way that we could impound them if they're abandoned in the city.
Yeah, that's easy.
And then we added to the discussion, I asked whether or not they would want to, the city council would wanna regulate them with permits like we did dockless
Okay.
bikes, but it sounds like through this discussion that we may not want to do that.
Okay.
That's what Sarah was saying.
No, I didn't say not permit them. I said don't put a limit on
Don't
how
put a
many
limit on the-
companies we
okay.
could issue a permit to.
So we do wanna issue permits for the companies that wanna use them in Rollingwood, but not put a limit on it.
But if you did that, I think you're gonna go down a road of, I do think it's gonna be difficult enforcement. And I don't think anybody's gonna actually pull the permit, because you're gonna say, well,
Yeah.
we're permitted in Austin,
Yeah.
so we don't know who's gonna take it into Rollingwood or not.
Well, but they have the little geo fencing, right? So if they don't restrict you from bringing it into Rollingwood, they can't argue that we don't know. It's like, well, you're not prohibiting people from bringing it into Rollingwood. And if they bring it in and we impound it and we say, you want these back, you need to get a permit.
That's true.
Well, I would suggest, I was just more, I don't know that we need to do permits for scooters, cause I think that in general, we don't have streets that are designed for scooters. We have a lot of hills, and especially the commercial scooters are not designed to go on hills, and you're supposed to be wearing a helmet, and a lot of people don't. And so I think that what would happen is if we just make it an offense for people to leave it and abandon it, people could still ride a scooter in, park it in a private space and keep it running, and then be able to take it back without there being an issue. Because we're not making it, you can still drive it on our street, right? Or no, I guess you're saying you can't abandon it on the public street. Can you still
You could still
ride it?
Ride
Yeah, you
it.
can still ride it.
I'll read it.
I mean,
But I think you make a good point.
They pretty much land in all the same spot on Rollingwood Drive,
Right.
coming up the hill.
that's because
I mean, every time I run by there,
Yeah.
that's where they are.
Yeah.
I've never seen them anywhere else really in the
I've
neighborhood.
seen
and
them in
then
the
kind of at the
park.
park.
It's like a scooter
Yeah.
track.
So they've had to come from somewhere to get up to the park.
Mhm.
They've had to come up a hill.
I think not permit them. I think your point of not incentivizing them to, like, let's not support them being in the city just because they are probably going to die and not going to make it up the hills. So
Mhm.
there's no reason for us to incentivize that by permitting it. If you wanna do it, go for it, at your own risk, just don't abandon it.
Yep.
So maybe we, make a motion tonight to, ask the, the attorney to draft ordinance section 12.06 to prohibit the abandonment of motor-assisted scooters in the city?
Sounds like a plan.
Or do we just give direction and have them bring it back?
Just direction.
Okay,
That's
there's
all I
direction.
need.
So just the abandonment part
So
of it.
all we, to
All
be clear,
scooters.
the only thing we're gonna bring back this ordinance again, and it will, the only thing it will address is the abandonment of any scooter within public right of way or, okay, all right, we can do that. You got notes?
Got it.
Okay.
So when we were discussing the little pocket motorbikes, the main basis that we had for prohibiting them was that they are not street legal. And so it kind of eliminated the need for us to address it because like you could only legally ride it on your own property or
Texas state law.
in a parking lot. Is a scooter street legal?
I have no idea.
I think it is.
They get ridden on streets, but I didn't know if that was really illegal.
It is in Texas state
Determination.
law. They are,
Yeah.
Are they?
they're defined there and they're legal.
Okay.
Okay, any other comments or direction to council? All right, we'll take no action on item number 2. And we will move to item number 3 and open a public hearing at 7:17.
Actually, we don't need to, we can if you want, but we don't need to because we don't have any, should I just say this to everyone? Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that. So here's what happened at the planning and, on this issue at the Planning and Zoning Commission, there was a discussion, and ultimately the Planning and Zoning Commission didn't take any action. They didn't do anything. They didn't make a recommendation of approval, and they didn't make a recommendation of denial, and they just let it sit. And so as a result of that, you don't have any authority to take any action tonight either, because you have to, under the state law, you have to get a recommendation, some recommendation from the city council in order to take any
From
action.
the planning.
P&Z.
From the P and Z, my apologies. So that didn't happen. You can still have a discussion about it, you can even still have a public hearing about it, but it won't matter. It's all gonna have to come back with a recommendation, and then you'll have to hold your public hearing, because we have to renotice the public hearing under the statute for the proper requirements. So, you can have a conversation about this, because it's on the agenda, because it's my understanding there's a discussion to be had, but there's no need to hold a public hearing, and you can't take any action on it.
So if the city council directed planning and zoning to look at an issue and they have to have a public hearing on it, and then planning and zoning decides that they never wanna take action on it, that means the city council can never take it back up?
Yes, but that won't happen, because if a city council is smart, they get rid of the entire planning and zoning commission that refuses to take action on an item that they want them to take action on.
Can the city get rid of the planning and zoning commission?
Yes. So the planning and zoning commission is, and I'm not saying you would ever do this, and I don't think your planning and zoning commission would ever refuse to take action to bring forward a recommendation. But in my 18 years, I've dealt with this a couple of times in other communities. Planning and zoning commissioners are appointed and removed at the will of the city council. So, with or without cause. So, if a planning and zoning commission decided that they really didn't like a particular zoning issue, and they refused to make a recommendation to city council, the solution for city council would be to replace the planning and zoning commission.
And I did talk to the Chair of Planning and Zoning today, and he actually apologized for not taking action last night. It was not their intent to.
Yes, that's right.
It was not their intent to not give us a recommendation. That there was just no clear path forward for them at the time, and so they took no action. But it wasn't an indication of their unwillingness to do so.
I'm not gonna threaten to take them out
Right.
because they would be really happy.
Yeah, but none of my statements was intended to imply that the planning and zoning commission was at all nefarious.
Yes,
in
we
their
appreciate their
actions.
service very much.
But so we do have the option of going ahead and having a public hearing.
Absolutely.
And I suspect that they're folks here who do want to speak on this topic, and so it would be my request that we go ahead and have the public hearing, if that's okay with everyone. With that, we will open a public hearing at 7:21 to discuss, and we won't take action, possible action on a request to amend the city's code of ordinances to expressly include allowing for banks and savings and/or savings and loan institutions in the current C2 zoning district of the city of Rollingwood. Do we have anyone here from the public wishing to speak?
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm William Milligan. Sorry, let me say it again. William Milligan. I'm with the Highline Group. I'm on here on behalf of Vista Bank, who is the potential purchaser of said property, 2802 BK's Road. And we had our meeting with Planning and Zoning last night, and just to shed a little light on why I think things went the way they went, is primarily because we're in what's your district's called C2 zoning. And so C2 zoning, in one subsection 169 does not explicitly allow for financial institutions. And I believe 171, which doesn't expressly not allow financial institutions. And then going back to 170, for if we were to seek a special use permit, also does not expressively allow for financial institutions to come forward and ask for a special use permit. When we had our initial discussions with city staff, we were given some options, and due to the time frame that we were given by the property owner, we basically went we call it the Hail Mary route, and we were looking to see if we can change the language in the zoning from in the C2 generally to allow for financial institutions, because it would take us longer to go the route of trying to get in and see if we could change just the language of under section 170 of expressively allowing financial institutions to ask or request for a special use permit. And so that's the reason why we kind of didn't get a yes or no last night. It was because we were trying to go one way, and we probably already knew it wasn't going to happen. It wasn't going to be able to happen. So we've also done our due diligence. We've also looked at the site from a financial standpoint, from a realistic what can be done to the site, to what the city wants. And we understand that the city is in need of more retail. We see that. Brian May, who unfortunately cannot be here tonight, is the president of Vista Bank Austin, which is currently resides at 35th Street and Jefferson. But he's currently a large entity over here in Westlake Hills. He's a resident. His kids go to school there. He's very ingrained in the community. So he understands what your needs are as well. In fact, he'll be the first to tell you, yes, you do need more retail. However, looking at this site, which was in Mr. Gaddy's, as you all know, and it's a very narrow, tight little site. There's really the access in and out of the site is not great. You cannot make a left turn per text dot out of the site, so you have to be heading from BK's Road going westward towards the site to turn in, and when you leave the site, you must exit right to go out. So there are some egress ingress conditions on this that exist on this site. Currently, the site does not meet your permeable surface condition. It's also, with the new some updated zoning, the rear portion of the building is actually over the setback line. And then there's some other challenges to this site as well that we would be looking at if we were granted the opportunity to actually put a financial institution on this site. But the bank is a 106-year-old community bank. Okay, they're based out of Lubbock. They've been here for a very long time. They're not going anywhere. They're a very solid bank. They're a community-based bank, which means they're here for the community. They're not here like a Chase or a Bank of America, where you're just a number and it's going to take you forever to get a loan if you can even get one through them. This is one of those true community banks that actually helps the community, works with the community, is a partner in the community, and will do whatever they can to help the community. One of the things that we have been made aware of was you have about a 20-year-old mixed-use retail plan that you would like to see for that side of the corridor going along Bee Caves Road. But in my experience and with what I've dealt with over in Highland Park, you know, we're off of Hillcrest right across from SMU. When I worked on the Chase Bank that was right there on Hillcrest, and really Hillcrest, it was okay. It just had, there's some, you know, typical college types, boutique retail and whatnot, but just nothing that really lasted or stayed. And then once the bank came in, and then Comerica Bank came in and kind of solidified those, we'll call that an end cap to that retail corridor, that narrow retail corridor, which is similar to what you have. It seemed to spur, you know, a new sense of development for that area. And now, you know, they've got, you know, a Chick-fil-A there, they've got a sushi place there, they've got a bunch of different, like, solid, I mean, even 7-Eleven with no gas went into this area. So I'm not saying that we could be the catalyst that spurs the development. If there's a developer on the fence right now looking to maybe do something with this corridor, or even looking at your, you know, mixed-use plan wanting to push that development. But, you know, when people see things happen, it tends to get them off the fence and make them move. So that's really kind of where we're at. And I guess tonight, since you cannot take action on this, you know, agenda item, what we'd like to know is, if we were to go the route of, you know, working with the city staff to get back to board, see if we can get the language added to expressly permit a financial institution to ask for a special use in a C2 zoning, special use permit in a C2 zoning. Would it be worth our time, you know, investment and, you know, cost investment to go that route, to then ask for a special use permit and then come back again and show you the site again and say, okay, would you be willing to grant us a special use permit? So that's really kind of where we're at today. Do you have any questions for me?
Questions? We're gonna have a more full discussion here in a minute.
Okay.
I don't see any questions, just thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anyone else wishing to testify in public hearing portion of this discussion? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing at 7:28 and open it for discussion with the council.
I would say that, right now with us having retail coach working on the best and highest use of properties in planning and zoning, planning to take up our zoning, for the corridor, I would be reluctant, to change the zoning, which we're not doing, but also to allow a special use permit for those tracts of property without having gone through the exercise that we're gonna go through. That's kind of where I lie on it. I also voted against changing C1 to allow the veterinarian. So I would not vote to allow that special use right now. I think it's important that we really take a hard look at our zoning and what we want, before we have somebody invest in a property that's probably gonna be a long-term tenant, which is great, but, I think we wanna make sure that we have the right businesses there.
I listened to the planning and zoning meeting from last night this morning and heard multiple commissioners echoing what Wendy just said. I think that group has put a lot of time into getting ready to do the work of looking at zoning and they're working on the comprehensive analysis RFQ, and we have RCDC having put money towards this corridor study, and we're just now getting that data back. And so I'm also inclined towards the comments I heard at planning and zoning, which appeared to me to be the majority if a vote had been taken. I could be wrong, they didn't take one. I did hear some discussion from them that if the request had actually been a question of a special use permit, the conversation that they had might have been a little different. I can't say for sure that I know what the like what the criteria is for a special use permit, because we haven't done one of those, so I don't know if they're, like, I don't know what, if we were to change C2 zoning to allow a special use permit for financial institutions, I don't know then whether that's the equivalent to changing C2 zoning to allow financial institutions, or if there's some threshold you then have to get to that shows that that properly is uniquely situated only for a financial institution. So,
They explained that to us at
did I
the,
miss a meeting?
when you were, it was the
Okay.
one meeting that you've missed ever, I think. But they did, the attorney said if you give a special use permit, then, as long as that business is there and operating under that special use, they're allowed to do it, even when you change the zoning. But once that use is not being used in that way anymore, then they'd be required to go to, back to
So,
the normal zoning.
I knew that. I think my question is actually a little different. It's, I don't know what a special use, like, I don't know what
What the
threshold.
requirements are
Right,
for a
or
special
is,
use
if
permit.
if we go in and we say you can apply for a special use permit in C2, I don't know if that's the equivalent to saying you can have, for financial institutions, you can have a financial institution in C2, or if there's some threshold that someone has to show that the property meets some type of criteria that limits it to certain purposes, where a financial institution would be the best use, or I don't know what that threshold is, so.
Amber, it sounded like, the presenters, that they were talking about if they were gonna get a special use permit, that we'd actually have to change our ordinance to allow a bank or financial institution to even ask for a special use?
Correct.
So right now, there's not a way for a bank or a financial institution to do it, so there's really not a threshold. We'd have to just go in and change the ordinance to allow that. Is that kind of?
And then are there things, if you're asking for a special use permit, do we have things in our code that says what you have to prove up?
That's, I'm interested in that question also.
What's the question?
Like criteria for a hardship.
Is it a
Something you
hardship,
have-
or is it a,
No,
like?
no, but I mean, similar to, that, like, if you
No.
wanna grant a hardship, you have to meet certain criteria.
Right.
Is there
Well, if you-
criteria for a
there are criteria
special
that
use
have to be met in order to be granted a special use permit. It's found in 107, somewhere in 107, I was just looking at it, 107 of your code. Criteria, 107-401. There's a general requirement. Oh, no, it's not 401.
400.
Maybe it's 400. I was just looking at it. Yeah, so the appearance, size, density, and operating characteristics of the proposed special use shall be compatible with the surrounding neighborhood uses. The proposed use will not have an adverse effect on the value of surrounding properties nor impede the property development. Their property development. The proposed use will not create a nuisance or nor otherwise interfere with the neighbor's enjoyment of their property or operation of their business. The traffic that the proposed use can reasonably be expected to generate on existing streets will not create nor add significantly to congestion, safety hazards, nor parking problems in the area, nor will it disturb the peace and quiet of the neighborhood, and the proposed use complies with all other applicable city ordinances and regulations. So that's the criteria, unless there's extra and here's extra specific criteria for bank and savings loans, that they must comply with that. Yeah, that's under
That's in C1.
and C1, the site plan must provide adequate stack space for motor vehicles. The site shall be designed and developed in a manner that will not impede the flow of traffic in the vicinity of the bank. The site plan shall provide for adequate landscaping of and the maintenance of the landscaped area shall be governed by the provisions of any restrictive covenants enforceable by the city. There shall be no more than one curb cut for access to the office complex unless otherwise approved by council. So those are the general requirements someone would have to comply with and prove to this body in order for a special use permit to be granted for a bank.
What were the first two?
The very first two,
Yes.
the appearance, size, density, and operating characteristics of the proposed special use shall be compatible with the surrounding neighborhood uses. The proposed use will not have an adverse effect on the value of surrounding properties nor impede their proper development.
And is that a subjective call by the council?
It is subjective in nature, yes. By this body.
So I too would have, have some concern with changing the entire C2 zoning ordinance for this one entity, because it would be a blanket issue, going forward. I might be a little bit more understanding of a special use permit, but I'm really torn on this because, you know, we've had a lot of discussion about trying to bring retail in to that whole corridor, and that's kind of the only corridor we have, so. But I also acknowledge the very small lot size of this lot, and, you know, we're kind of rolling the dice that if we don't allow something there, I mean, it's great to want retail on that whole corridor, but we could also just have an empty Gaddy's for the next 20 years. So, I don't know, I'm torn on it. But I did have one question that I want to ask Amber and maybe Charlie. There was a comment made in the public hearing related to the back of the building being over the setback line. Would that constitute a non-conforming structure? And if so, remind me what our ordinance is that we've worked a lot on in the past related to non-conforming structures and bringing that structure into conformity.
Yeah, so if the building is over the existing, impedes upon the existing setback lines, that would be a non-conforming building or structure. Section 107-422 of your Code of Ordinances addresses non-conforming structures. And to paraphrase, it says that a non-conforming building or structure may not be altered in a manner that increases the extent of the non-conformity. If they can't demolish more than 50% of it, if they do, it would have to come into conformance. If the building is removed, everything else has to come into conformance with the regulations for the district. That's essentially the big part of this, of the issue with an existing building. There are other things that come into play if it gets burned down or something, but with respect to someone using that building, they're fairly limited with respect to how they can alter it without having to come into conformance.
So it sounds like that might not be an issue for the bank, but if I were the owner of that property, I would probably want to know that if someone were to buy it and want to tear it down and do something else, my tiny lot is actually tinier than I thought it was.
As far as building footprints are concerned.
I think going to your point of tiny, that lot is extremely challenging to do anything on, and I'm really surprised that they can even make this work. So I don't know what kind of retail everyone has in mind that would go there and actually work, but unless there's some really good suggestions, I don't see why not to grant some sort of
Yeah, my
special
main
use
concern
permit.
is if you change,
I understand the zoning. I'm not saying change the zoning,
yeah,
the code. I'm just saying a special use permit.
yeah. I had a question on the special use permit. Could you put stipulations? Can a special use permit, I guess by nature, it follows that particular entity. It doesn't follow
No, it runs with the land.
it runs with the land.
Right, so if the owners of that bank were to sell to another company who wanted to have a bank there, they could do that. It doesn't.
But
run
only
with
a bank.
But only a bank. It runs with the land. So the special use would be as to the nature of the use regardless of who owned the property or who owned the actual building or the bank. All zoning runs with the land.
I think
It's a
that-
legislative permit, not an administrative permit.
That the strip mall that's there now, if the city of Rollingwood has a comprehensive plan and we change zoning, it may incentivize other owners to sell property and combine properties. So I think it could limit in the future having more usable space for a multi-use property or something different that we may want to put in that area. But it's a crystal ball to know whether or not that's happening. I just think it would be putting the cart before the horse, so to say, if we didn't go through the exercise of just letting the planning and zoning look at what they want to do and the best of highest use for every property before granting a special use permit. As much as this business looks like it's a great business, looks like it could fit into the area. I just don't know if it's the right fit for the corridor, if we're really trying to make some choices that are gonna benefit our tax base and city in the future.
Okay. Well, as we've stated, there's limited ability for us to take any action tonight, but that gives you a taste of what the full discussion would sound like if you came back.
Can I bring something else to light real quick?
Sure. State your name one more time.
William Milligan with the Highline Group, again. Just so you know, we did, as part of our due diligence, we did reach out to the neighboring properties, and just so you know, they're not interested in either selling nor buying property, just so you know, and be aware. But that's why we would beautify this one site to make it a gym with all the landscape, the green paving, everything. So it would kind of stand out against your service station, which is constantly busy, so it's not going anywhere, or that northern retail, which seems like it's got a lot of traffic as well. I don't know if it's going anywhere, so thank you.
Thank you. And Amber, would you make sure that this is back on planning and zoning's plate for next month? Encourage them to take some sort of action.
Yes.
Some recommendation.
Okay. With that, we will move on to the consent agenda. Unless anyone wants to remove anything, do I have a motion?
I move to approve the consent agenda.
I have a motion.
I second.
Can I ask you, Charlie, can I clarify, can I vote on minutes that I wasn't here for?
Yes, you may.
But had an enthusiastic second. We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. Moving to the regular agenda, we will pull up item number 7, discussion on the quarterly investment report for the first quarter. Is Abel here? Hey, Abel. Yeah, see that. Only one person voted.
The investment report is for the first quarter of the fiscal year. The city currently has about $533,000 invested in tax pool. That's for the general fund, the water fund, and wastewater fund. The interest the city made for the first quarter was a little bit over $2,300, and yields have kind of gone flat a little bit. The probably is closer to about 1.6, and it's kind of stayed at that level for the last month or so. And just today I was reading a deal from tax pool, and they don't anticipate any large increases or decreases because of what the Fed has done. Any questions?
You could get that yield up, that'd be great.
I understand.
Work on that. I'll set you up with the comptroller. Excellent job, April. No action to be taken, and with that, we'll move on to item number 8, discussion on the budget review for the first quarter. Abel?
Yes, sir. Some of the items regarding the first quarter on our budget. Our city sales taxes are doing a little bit better than the previous quarter from last year. And building permit fee revenue also is up. And my comment on that is the way the city is conducting the operation for development is that the revenue is more contemporary now with expenses. In previous years, revenue would only be received from the other party about once every 4 to 6 weeks, but expenses were being paid all the time, so to speak. So
pause
now
there,
the
Abel, do you, go ahead, finish your statement.
So now revenue is more like I said, in line with expenses, which makes it easier to see how we're doing. And like I said, revenue compared to the previous year is up regarding the building permit fees.
So my question is, expand on that a little bit. Do you feel like that is a cash flow issue or an excess revenue? Are you coming out with excess revenue over expenses, or are you just feeling like
A little bit of
cash
both.
flow?
Right now, revenue is exceeding expenditures regarding that operation. And number two, I don't have to wait X number of weeks before I get the revenue to pay for those expenses.
Okay.
So to answer your question, our revenue is exceeding our expenditures in that operation. And like I said, revenue is more contemporary with what's going on in that part of the city's operations.
And pause there for a minute. Did we make a decision? What was our decision on looking at the rates or the fees again? Did we table that?
Right, chose to wait until we hired the new public works director. He's got some experience in looking at the fees and the rates, but we feel comfortable that because we are making revenues over expenditures, we feel comfortable where the fees are right now. And I think it just speaks to Carrie's performance. She is more efficient than what we had in place previously, and so I think we're not seeing the expenditures like we were in the past.
There you go.
Okay. And my last comment on the budget review is on the water sales. Our water sales had really picked up this quarter compared to the previous year. So, and I guess like anything else, water sales is driven by the weather to a large extent. And we've had a dry summer, dry fall. And so our water sales have exceeded the previous year. So that's where we are. Wastewater revenues, though, have been rather stagnant compared to to the water fund. Any questions?
Questions, council? Thanks, Abel.
Yes, sir.
No action to be taken. Moving on to agenda item 9, presentation, discussion, and possible action on a resolution suspending the February 6, 2020 effective date of Texas Gas Service Company's request to increase to permit the city of Rollingwood time to study the request. Amber?
We have Thomas Brocato. He is legal counsel representing the city of Austin and all the other small cities who would be receiving this rate increase that Texas Gas is proposing. And so he's going to present a brief summary of the process that we'll be going through.
Thank you. Good evening, council. My name is, Ms. Lewis indicated, is Thomas Brocato. I'm an attorney with Lloyd Gosling, and as she stated, I represent cities across the state on electric, gas, and water utility matters. On December the 20th, Texas Gas Service Company filed a rate application at the Railroad Commission. They also, at the same time, filed that application with all the cities in the Central Texas service area and the Gulf Coast service area that have original jurisdiction or legal authority over the rates and services. That rate application proposes a number of things, most notably to increase rates on a system-wide basis by approximately $17 million per year. In addition, they're proposing to consolidate their Gulf Coast service area with their Central Texas service area. They've also proposed a number of other things, such as some new rate riders, new depreciation rates, and they've sought approval of their invested capital. Now, under the law, you are a regulatory authority with the ability to set rates within your city limits. Under the law, you are able to take action by the effective date, which the utility has stated is February the 6th, but you also are authorized under the law to suspend the time for city action by an additional 90 days. So you can push out that deadline from February 6th to May the 6th, which is an additional 90 days. That allows the cities additional time to review the application, to conduct discovery, and hopefully settle the application. So that's what's before you this evening is a resolution that would authorize the suspension by 90 days. Assuming that you adopt that resolution, then we will come back on or before that May 6th deadline, asking you to take some type of final action. And that might be a denial, it might be approval of a settlement. It could legally be a proposal to set rates, although that's highly unlikely. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those.
Thomas, can you also speak to, there's a section in the resolution that would, the city of Rollingwood would engage you. Can you speak to that? And
Sure.
how it would not cost the city money?
Certainly. Under the Gas Utility Regulatory Act, or GURA, cities are authorized to participate in rate-making proceedings such as this and be reimbursed for their expenditures. And so the way that this would work is, assuming you adopt the resolution, it would also authorize you to participate with the other cities, including the city of Austin, to hire outside counsel, that is our firm, as well as consultants to conduct a review. Those expenditures would then be submitted to the Railroad Commission and reviewed. And assuming that the commission approves those expenditures, then TGS would be authorized or directed to pay those expenses. So this would not cost the city any money directly, although it would be included in rates that are spread system-wide. The reason why that's a good value proposition is because the cost of consultants and legal expenses are less than the benefits that are derived through our participation.
Are there any examples of the Railroad Commission not approving those types of expenses?
There are, in 30 years, I've never had the Railroad Commission disallow any of our expenses. There are a couple of examples where they have found some city expenditures to be unreasonable. They're usually because of some unique circumstances, such as a city that refused to sign on to a settlement, and the Railroad Commission punishing them in some fashion. But those examples are pretty rare and in the distant past. But if, for example, they were to find some expenditure that they thought was unreasonable, then that would be a risk that we would take or the consultants would take. We're not going to give you an invoice.
Thomas, how successful has this consortium been in challenging the rates that Texas Gas wants to implement in the past?
Sure. I'm unaware of any case, and this is doing, again, 30 years doing electric, gas, or water utility matters, where we've not provided value that exceeded our costs. And indeed, if we weren't able to do that, we would say, don't get involved. If, for example, the company was asking for $17 million and we thought it was going to cost $100,000 and that they were going to get more than $16.9 million, then we would say, you know what, it's not worth it. We've looked at it. There's nothing here. Don't get involved. So we're constantly mindful of that. But we've never run into that situation.
What is the average, do you know roughly what the average increase on an average homeowner would be?
Good question. I think I do have that with me, actually. I know that the total proposed increase translates into a 15.64% increase overall to the company's revenues. That is if you exclude the cost of gas, which is just a pass-through. So what they call the base rate portion of a customer's bill would increase if they get the full request by about 15.65%. However, the company is proposing a decrease to commercial rates, which translates into a larger than 15.64% increase for residential customers. I think I have it somewhere in these documents, but I don't know that off the top of my head. But residential customers, if the company's proposal was adopted, would see an increase of larger than that 15.65%, excluding gas. On the impact on the overall bill, again, I've got that here, but I'd have to pull that out.
What's their justification for a bifurcated rate increase?
There's a number of factors. The company has, wants to include a number of expenditures that they've had, capital investment that they've made that they want to include in rates. In addition, they've got an increase in various costs that they've are passing along. They also, again, have some increases associated with depreciation, and they're proposing for a return or profit component that would be an increase over current rates.
And Thomas, some of those capital and costs involve combining the Central Texas gas with the coastal gas. And Texas Gas recently redid all of the infrastructure because it was wiped out from Harvey in the coastal gas. And so now they want Central Texas to help
Wanting
pay
us to pay for it.
for.
Yeah, that's something else that we're concerned about. TGS has a number of service areas throughout the state. They have the one here in Central Texas. They call it the Central Texas Service Area. They have one in the Galveston area that's called the Gulf Coast Service Area. That includes a part of South Jefferson County, which is in the Beaumont-Port Arthur area. They also have separate areas. They have one in the Rio Grande Valley in South Texas. They have one out in West Texas, El Paso area. And there's been a trend amongst gas utilities in the state over the last several years to sort of combine those service areas. The reason you have different service areas originally was because there's different characteristics of those areas. There's a different cost to serve those areas. The Gulf Coast may have a different climate slightly than here in Central Texas. They may have greater density here in Central Texas than you do in the Gulf Coast area. And so one of the things that we look at when a utility is proposing to consolidate service areas is the cost to serve those two areas, and is there a disparity? And if there is, and if there's no real justification for combining those service areas, then we might advocate to not consolidate them. I will tell you, just on its face, it's combining the Gulf Coast service area with the Central Texas service area seems unique. So we'll see whether that's justified or not. And we certainly will be looking at the disparate rate impact, because if customers in the Central Texas service area are going to have to pay more because of a consolidation, and conversely, cities in the Gulf Coast service area would pay less because that burden is shifted to Central Texas, then that's something we certainly will be looking at.
When did they last go for a rate increase?
I believe it was about 3 years ago. We were talking before the meeting about the last time I was here. Roughly 3 or 4 years ago. I'd have to go back and confirm. But you all were involved at that time as well.
And so through the rate process and contested process, will you have them prove up their actual expenses and that sort of thing?
Yes, the way that rates are set here in Texas, as well as in all 50 states for nearly 100 years, is that you take a recent historical test year. You look at all the revenues and expenditures during that time. You make known and measurable adjustments that have occurred since the end of the test year, and then you set rates using various statutory and precedential practices to set rates going forward. And so we will be applying all that precedent and those rules to review the company's request and to ultimately make sure that customers are not paying anything more on their gas bills than is reasonable.
You'll try to make sure that they're not subsidizing poor investment decisions on their part and that sort of thing.
And that's something that we look at as well. We want to make sure that not only that the customers in this area are not subsidizing other operations of the utility, but in addition that customer classes in this service area are not subsidizing other customer classes. Now, having said all this, we understand they provide a vital service to your community. I do work for cities all over the state. We understand that you live and work with them and you need their cooperation. While we may disagree as to what reasonable rates are, we try to always do that in a professional way that understands that relationship and maintains it.
So you'd agree that it's important for any utility, publicly or privately owned, to have to prove up all of those sorts of expenses for their rate?
Most definitely. I mean, they're a monopoly, and the price that they pay for being a monopoly is that they have to answer to a regulator. I mean, gas utility service, just like electric utility service, generally is what they call a natural monopoly, because you're not going to have competing gas utilities generally because of the the very high cost of infrastructure. You don't want multiple pipes running out through all your communities. And because of that, you have regulation. And again, you have that in all 50 states in the United States. And again, kind of one of the prices they pay for not having competition is, they have to prove up their expenditures to a regulator.
I totally agree with that, and I would hope that you would express that sentiment to your friends at the City of Austin and their water rates.
Understood.
That's what I was thinking.
In all fairness, I must confess, I do work for the City of Austin, but well noted.
Thank you.
Sure.
All disguised.
If you're ready for a motion,
To you, maybe. Yes, I'm ready for a motion.
I move to approve a resolution suspending the February 6, 2020 effective date of the Texas Gas Service Company's requested increase to permit the City of Rollingwood time to study request.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
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 Aye. All those opposed say no. Motion carries.
Thank you,
Thank you
Council.
very
And
much.
as I noted earlier, as the deadline for final action approaches, we will be providing you with additional documentation and ask you to take some type of formal final action. And again, hopefully that will be approval of a settlement agreement. Most of these cases, or many of them do in fact settle. So,
Great.
thanks so much.
Thank you. Okay, that we'll move on to item number 10, discussion and possible action on an amendment to the city's flood damage prevention ordinance. And I will ask Amber to take it from there.
Sure, I'm gonna also call up Jay Campbell. LNB serves as the floodplain administrator. Basically, this ordinance adopts the new firm maps that Travis County adopted. And this must be adopted prior to January 22nd to ensure Rollingwood residents still have the ability to participate in the National Flood Insurance Program. And so I think,
Come on up, Jay.
Long time, no see.
Yeah,
good
we
evening.
missed you, man.
Well, I think you covered it. In addition to that, we also have the statutory authorization section that's been added. So this effective map dated January 22, 2020 replaces the prior, which was January 6, 2016. There are no significant changes, not really visible on the map. I've asked to have it confirmed that there are actually no changes at all. Because looking at the map, there's no visible changes, and I'm supposed to get feedback on that, but there is no visible change to the map. So,
Jay, do you want to tell them, the FEMA representative also advised that this might be a prime time to begin looking at
Correct.
some of our building requirements?
yeah, creating more stringent rules with the floodplain and the flood ordinance. I created a memo. Amber has that, and we can present that to council when ready.
So at the next meeting, we might bring some ideas that you might want to think about implementing to further protect homeowners from flooding. But we'll give you all time to do that. We didn't want to make you feel like you needed to pass something like that tonight. So this is all that needs to be adopted tonight.
So are we supposed to get a copy of the map, or we can just adopt the ordinance?
I believe we do have a copy
It's
of
not
it.
in-
Yeah, I didn't attach the map. I don't have a copy of the map, but it essentially hasn't changed. It is no different other than the date has been changed.
I can make sure you all
Okay.
receive a copy of the map.
I would just like it for records, because I
You
have
bet.
to get flood insurance for my home.
Anything else, Jay?
So
No, that should be it.
Even
Sarah.
with the change in was it Atlas 14, whatever?
Right, it doesn't reflect that yet.
So there's no change in the flood maps?
Not right now, no. That should be coming. We don't have a date for that, but that is something that we'll see probably in the next, few years.
So, are we ready for a motion?
Yes.
So I would move to amend the City of Rollingwood's Code of Ordinances, Part 2, Land Development Code, Chapter 103, Section 103.116, basis for establishing the areas of special flood hazard, providing a savings clause, providing a severability clause, and providing an effective date.
Have a motion.
Second?
Wendy seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Thanks, Jay. Moving on to item number 11, discussion possible action on a site plan approval at 2700 Bee Caves Road.
Before you, this is Austin I, what's gonna be called Austin I. They are going to remodel the existing office building. They're gonna make parking lot improvements. They are altering the driveway. Is the applicant here? Okay, we'll have them present in a minute. Parking lot improvements to achieve ADA compliance. And so you have the site plan in front of you. We had our zoning reviewers, K-Freeze, review the site plan. They have signed off on it with regard, but the only outstanding comment they have is as long as TxDOT approves the traffic impact analysis. We have not received approval from TxDOT regarding that, so we would ask that you approve the site plan pending receipt of approval from TxDOT on the TIA.
Do we have a copy of the TIA?
You don't, but we could get you that.
Yeah, I would like to see that, just out of interest for seeing a new TIA for the area.
Absolutely. We can do that. I'll give it to you.
And does this property, was it that they were adding a driveway, like an ingress? Was there a driveway issue with it?
There was. Do you want to?
Okay.
Just state your name, please.
Okay. I'm Megan McPherson with Stantec. We're the civil engineer on the project. There was, and I'm taking over for a previous engineer, so if I can answer the driveway question if you give me like 2 seconds. So it appears we're using the existing driveways, but they put in a median on one of the existing driveways. So they divided the driveway. That's the change.
Is that per TxDOT?
I believe that's per TxDOT's recommendations.
So they're only allowing a right in and a right out.
That, it looks, yeah, based on the way that this is drawn, yes. It's a right in and right out.
So my recollection of the last time the site plan was before us was that Mike Alexander on his own had decided to propose that the council take some actions that the building owner hadn't actually requested. That was the way it was presented to us. And then I noticed that the site plan actually included removing the access driveway that currently exists to Bee Caves Road. So that it looks like that has been removed in this plan as well, which I think I don't have an issue with, but I just wanted to point out, since I know you're new, you said you were new on it, yeah.
I'm totally
So
100%
the last time it was before us, that was an odd issue.
Okay, yeah, I see now. I
if
see
it
what
has
the
been
driveway
approved by everyone, like Carrie's looked at it, everyone's looked at it, so at this point, we're just taking the recommendation of all of our staff and professionals. So if you're ready for a motion, I'll make one.
I'm ready.
Okay, I would move to approve the site plan for 2700 Bee Caves Road contingent upon approval by TxDOT.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Wendy seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed say no.
And I would also like to see a copy of the
We'll make sure you
traffic
have that.
impact analysis so that we understand what was presented.
Stop holding back on the traffic data.
Seriously.
Hold that on us.
I have some copies here of the initial round of comments back from TxDOT, if you want to see those, and then we can get you the TIA.
Great.
Um,
Thank you.
Okay, with that, we'll move on to item
Thank you.
number 12, discussion and possible action on an amendment to the city's water adjustment policy and procedures within the current utility bill appeals process policy, and ask Sarah to explain.
Okay, well, this was, we had on the agenda when back in October or November, the Utility Commission had gone over making some tweaks to this to make it clear how our process was supposed to be handled. And when it came up, we didn't have a copy in front of us when we were discussing at the Utility Commission, and there was something that I thought should be changed, and there was concern about making the change on the fly. So I talked to Jackie Bob again before he left, and essentially the only change from what was proposed by the Utility Commission was in the third paragraph, where it says appeals should be filed as soon as possible, but no later than 6 months after issuance of the first contested utility bill. The way the Utility Commission had it was after receipt of the first contested utility bill. And because there's no way for us to prove when they received the bill, it's easier for us to enforce that by saying 6 months after we issued the bill. And so that's essentially the only change to this.
I was confused because I thought maybe I missed, maybe my mind is missing a meeting, but I thought that we had looked at this and that we didn't approve it. We asked for it to be sent back for there to be conversation about multiple items, and that it never came back to us. So I was confused that it said that we approved it on August 21st, 2019.
Yeah, council did, I don't think council approved that on that date, so
Okay.
I don't know what that, I don't know where that
So I
date
just wanted to
came
make
from
sure,
on that. Yeah.
I was just trying to make sure I didn't have a total memory mishap there. Okay. So I think one of my questions last time was, in paragraph, or in number 4, on the reasonable cause for appeal includes number 4, that in calculating the excess water usage, it's typically estimated by determining the average water usage over the past 3 years for the same months, if weather conditions were similar. Was that average water conditions at that property or average water conditions in the city?
On that house.
So what
For that
happens
lot.
if somebody puts in an irrigation system and their previous average water usage for the previous 3 years was really low, and then they come in and they claim they had a leak, but really they put in a pool and a new irrigation system, and now they're getting, and maybe they had a small leak that they got repaired, and now they're gonna get the excess water beyond what they used to have when they didn't have those items.
So this is a guidance document, and it says excess water is typically estimated that way. So if there are other extenuating circumstances, those should be considered as well. This is just trying to.
So basically, if somebody has a leak at their house, they don't want to pay their water bill, they want everybody else in the neighborhood to subsidize it, I'm not gonna vote for this, because I had a water leak at my house this summer. I didn't go contest the bill, I fixed the issue, and my water bill went down the next month. Right? Am I missing something here?
Well,
We have
especially
that in
people who
place.
wait
Oh,
a
the
good
long
neighbor.
time.
It's already
Yeah. So I need to do something on another
You
night
can
to get
still
rid of
But
it.
As long
I
as
have
it's not
similar
cleared out.
issues of, like, I think that we also allow people a really long time to have had to not have noticed their leak.
I mean, I noticed it the second I opened up my mail. But there
Yes.
was something wrong,
Yes.
right? I mean, it was pretty obvious. Went from like $100 to $500.
Well, I
And
went
I wasn't
from,
watering my yard or anything. It was raining, and there was a leak
Mhm.
underground that there was no way for me to know.
Right now, now, the way it works is if somebody has a water leak, then the city staff will go out and say, well, it's not anything with our system, but yeah, we suspect you might have a leak, and or Jackie Bob would go out there and help them work through it.
I know, I just don't
And
agree
then
with all that.
if
I
they
mean,
had-
I go out there and just check my meter. I'm so paranoid about it now. I check it when I'm outside with my kids all the time to see if it's running.
Well, and you should double check your bill, cause I got a bill for using 25 gallons that, and we've never used more than like 8 at our house when we power washed one time, and our average is 2 to 3 every month. And it was just a improper meter reading. So people should check it if it
Yeah.
seems off too.
Yeah.
But before we actually started working on this a year ago, we weren't even charging the actual cost of the water. So that was one of the things that I discovered. So now we're at least charging people when we let them come back and not have to pay the full amount for their leaked water. We're actually charging them the cost to the city of that water. Whereas before, they
There
were
was a-
paying less than the cost of the water to the city.
There was a difference in the way we were calculating the cost.
Yeah, so,
we have
but I
adjusted.
still think that the time periods are,
I don't know, I think the whole thing's out of whack. It's just, personally.
But right now, how it works is the city staff has the discretion of saying whether or not they can get all or part of that back. And then if they don't agree with the city staff, then they can go for an appeal and it goes to the utility commission.
So the city staff asked for this guidance document. We have had a guidance document for years, and there was just some adjustments being made to this. So this is not a new policy, it's just a tweak to the policy that
That's
was
fine.
in place.
I don't agree with the policy. Doesn't matter if it's new or old or whatever it is, I just don't agree with it.
Well, there are all kinds of circumstances that come up where people have something unexpected that happens, and they take immediate action to correct the situation, but because we have the tiered water rates, they are charged.
Well, I understand how it all works. I'm just saying it's an issue on their property that somebody has to pay for that.
Well, when
But
Water
we're
at the end of
covering the
there.
cost of the water, so the city is not losing money.
When we were remodeling our house and we just moved in, my husband was in the back bedroom and my son ran in and said, "Where are my boots? Where's my umbrella?" And he said, "Why?" And he said, "Because it's raining in the living room." And he was like, "What?" And he ran into the living room and it was raining from upstairs because a plumber had left a fixture off and another contractor had turned the water on. And so our bill was $800 for that flood, and we normally spend like 8 gallons. So it was
8,000
8,000 gallons. But yeah. So for us, it was nice that if we could just pay the cost to the city on the water, because it was just an accident that happened instead of paying that $800 water bill. But as long as it's not
Well, I
costing
don't
the
think
city.
any of it is intentional.
Right, as long as
Y'all
it's
don't
not
have to
costing the
agree with
city.
me. I don't have to agree
Stay
with y'all
firm,
on
bud.
this. Y'all can
Like
do it.
that.
I'm not budging.
Stay-
We don't
stay in
have to
there, buddy.
all agree all the time. It's okay if we don't agree. I just don't agree. And I think it puts a burden on city and our staff and them having to mess with it, which they already have. They're too much stuff to do. And I don't know. I just don't agree with it.
I think that can be a lot of money to some people that would really impact a budget. And
We-
some people, it's not that much.
Hey,
We have had people who have had water stolen from them, so they contest their bill because they said, "I didn't use this water," and they didn't use the water because somebody else hooked up a hose and ran it under the fence and was using their water.
and they didn't notice that?
They did when they got the bill.
I mean, I don't know. That just seems beyond crazy to me. But
Okay,
it
Buck's
doesn't
unmoved.
matter. I'm in the minority. Y'all can vote however you
We're
want
about
to
to,
vote.
we're gonna do it, so, you stay
I'm not
firm, you stay
budging.
right there though.
Yeah.
okay, can I just clarify though on the excess water usage, if it's not being estimated by determining the average water usage over the past 3 years, then what measure is gonna be used?
That is left to the discretion of the utility director. And if the party making the appeal doesn't think that's reasonable, then they can appeal it to the utility commission. And then they look back. It's a matter of figuring out what seems to be the most typical usage if things were operating the way they should normally be operating. I mean, that's how they come up with it. So you use best available information available to come up with what you expect it to be, so.
Okay, any other discussion? Can't wait to see how this goes.
Oh, well, so did we want to change the way that it's being calculated, or make sure that there's more firm guidelines on how to calculate it before we vote on it? Or
How many scenarios do you want to try and,
I'm just clarifying
Yeah.
with my council member.
See, if y'all just get rid of it altogether, we won't have all these problems. Just saying.
I'm just thinking of a really large build that happened last year, and I was surprised by the amount of excess water use that was given to one homeowner after a very long leak period. So I guess I'm just wondering, I started thinking of scenarios where, if you actually go in and look at the appeals that are coming in, I'm not saying that nobody is going and actually hiring a plumber and doing the processes, but if you're looking at a way to save $1,000 by hiring a plumber who comes in for $100 and fixes a leak, and then you can claim excess water usage for the rest, I just want to know that we aren't creating a loophole that is enticing.
So the 3 months might be too long, and maybe just 1 month?
Well, the issue is if somebody puts in something new and or they buy a new home, they buy a home where the yard wasn't watered for years, right? And then they put in a new build, and then suddenly they have a lot of water consumption that wasn't being used by the previous owner. There's a lot of scenarios I could come up with. I just,
Maybe the last 3 months
Or
of
put in
the
a pool.
calculation?
right, you put in a pool for the first time. Suddenly you have a lot of water consumption that you didn't have before, or you put in an irrigation system and there wasn't one there before.
But that would
So-
be a one-time, it would straighten itself out within
It would,
a reasonable amount of time, wouldn't it?
within a couple of years, you would suddenly have average usage that was higher. I don't know what the solution is. I want to make sure I understand if we end up with an appeal.
Amy, come over to the dark side. Come on, you can do
I've been
it.
the only one
You
that.
can do it.
It's surprising to me that
Yeah,
for there to
but-
be another person who might vote with me wanting a different process. So I'm not
Just
even sure what to do
for
with
this
that.
process.
so all we're voting on is the amendments to this policy. There's already a policy in place. So,
It's not this policy though. It's an old
Override.
policy.
right, which people wanted clarified, and so we were making changes to clarify it. So if we don't adopt this, then they're stuck with the old policy that
What is the old policy? It's this, but just
very,
one line change?
very similar.
I think we need to see the
Red
red
line.
line.
I have my version of the red line. One of the changes I know was before they had the opportunity to wait an entire year to appeal that
Right,
bill.
they,
And so it was really detrimental on the budget when we had the hot summer last year, and then everybody just finally paid attention to their water bills, and they came in and complained, and I think in 1 month we had $18,000 in water adjustments.
I can attest to that, because I remember seeing it in the budget.
That was huge. And the problem is that all those adjustments happened after October 1. So it impacted the new budget, and we really struggled.
Keep going, Amber. Keep going.
We have also had people that come in with adjustments that were a fault of the system and not due to their usage, but due to error running their meters. So if,
That's a
That's
totally different
number two.
scenario.
That's
What
number
is the
two.
discretion, the utility commission has broad discretion, don't they?
Public Works is director has some discretion too, so.
Okay.
Well, I will say this, I'm gonna vote for this tonight, but I think that we need to come back once we have our new public works director and look at and do the rate study and look at whether on number 4, the excess water use is unnecessarily lenient right now.
Would it put undue burden on staff if we brought this back next month with the red line version of what the policy was and what it's proposed to be changed to?
Just means that people can wait longer to bring in their appeals if we don't change it.
A year?
They've-
It's still the year one?
Mm-hmm.
They've waited this long because I think Utility Commission originally approved these changes in August. It's been a while.
It's been several months.
So one more month wouldn't.
But the utility commission approved this and sent it to us, and there's a change from what they approved on this document? So what's the one that
Say-
they approved?
After issuance instead of after receipt. And that was,
And did they talk about that in their meeting and agree with that? Or did they disagree with that change?
it was not discussed at the meeting, and that was because they were just talking about it, and we didn't have a copy in front, I didn't have a copy in front of me when they were talking about it, and when I saw it in print, I said, really, that should say issuance instead of receipt. And I had suggested that we change that instead. It's not a substantive
I'm fine with that. I
change,
just,
it's,
last time this was here before us, I dealt with paragraph 4, and it doesn't sound like the utility commission ever actually looked at it
they did not look at it again
after we
because the
didn't approve
discussion
it.
at the time was that I would go back and we would talk with Jackie Bob, and we may have clarified how the typical water usage is estimated, but that's the way it had been done. And I think maybe it wasn't explained as completely in the previous version.
When's the next utility commission meeting?
February 4th?
Maybe we just have the utility commission look at that issue and then give us a final.
Gonna have to give some direction what you want them to look at,
Yeah.
because they've already looked at this and they're gonna wanna know
Well,
what
'cause I
they
think
need to
that's
look
what
at again.
Amy's saying that she did, that she asked them
That's why we didn't approve it in August, is that there wasn't a consensus after I raised the issue of this discretion and how are we calculating excess water usage. And so it was supposed to go back to utility commission to consider it, and then
And I think the discussion was that Jackie Bob and I would work on it, and we put in here what the usage, what the way he was doing the estimate, which is what the utility commission has been doing as well on the appeals that they got,
So you and Jackie Bob looked at it and made no changes to it?
We may have clarified it. It's been several months. I don't remember exactly what all the tweaks were. The after issuance was the only one that was a distinct change from what the wording was that was in there before. I think there was some clarification on the, how the excess water usage. I think there maybe wasn't a definition of how the excess water usage was determined, and this is the way it had been done, and so that was the way we put that wording in there.
Councilmember Patillo, since you raised the issue about number 4, I would defer to you. I'm fine with passing it tonight and asking utility commission to go back and look at it, or sending it back to utility commission for a final version. Well,
I would
follow your lead.
I would like to go ahead and have something in place that's better than what we have right now. So at this point, it's waited this long, but I think we can pass this, in my opinion. But like I said, I think we have a new public works director coming on who may have a different viewpoint on this issue. And I think at that point, I'd like to and we have a rate, we have the wastewater consulting being evaluated, and so I'd like to keep the issue open for at least that paragraph to be revisited in the future. That's just my request. Other people, it sounds like Buck may want it to just be removed in the future. If other people are willing to look at it in the future, that's what I would request.
Okay, do we have what we
Yes,
need?
it definitely sounds that way. All right, we all vote already?
Any other discussion?
Or motion or
But-
something?
Can I make the motion, Amy?
No, I don't.
Pretty
Sarah,
sure
do
you
you have
don't
a
want me
motion?
to.
I move
Sarah.
approval of the Rollingwood Utility Customer Appeals Process Summary as presented.
I will second, and I would ask that
Are you adopting the summary or the policy?
the policy,
Policy is called summary,
Oh, it is, okay.
so
Okay.
we can change the title if we
No,
want to,
it
but
doesn't matter to me, I just wanted to make sure we're approving the right thing.
We have a motion, we have a second, I think we have some discussion.
I
And
would
she's done.
ask that the date that's on there be updated to reflect today's date and to indicate that it has been approved today, if it passes.
Second.
I seconded that. Oh. That was just discussion. I think that's a non-substantive issue.
And do we have any other discussion? All those, we have motion and a second, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no.
No.
Motion carries. Do we, before we move off of, well, Charlie may get on to me, but do you have any other direction to the utility commission, and would that require a motion, or
Oh, like a second motion.
is that in order?
To do what?
To review.
To kill the
Number
appeals
4.
process?
Oh, yeah,
altogether?
that wouldn't require a motion, y'all could just give general direction to the commission,
Yes.
cause that's based on what y'all were looking at, yeah.
Okay.
If you wanna do that.
My direction would be for the utility commission, once we have the new public works director in place, to go back and look at paragraph 4 and evaluate how we're calculating excess water use due to confirmed leaks. And especially with regard to how we calculate average water usage.
Direction granted.
Thank you.
Any
Well directed.
Is there any dissenting direction?
I would just qualify that with listening to the presenter tonight saying how they, do the average waters by a year, when they're calculating the average water consumption, so I know that there's higher months and lower months, but I think that there's probably, some way that cities do it that's a standard way, and I don't know that this is, the 3-year, way is the marker of what most cities do to calculate it.
We look forward to future robust discussion.
Love it.
And with that, we will move on to item 13, discussion and possible action on a policy surrounding use of the park by nonprofit organizations. Looks like Wendy and Amber.
This came up, we were approached by a nonprofit organization to put a cookie booth in the park. This was also on the park agenda on Tuesday, and they directed me to work with Charlie on coming up with some sort of policy that they could recommend to you all. So I would ask that there be no action on this tonight, and we will plan on presenting something to you later.
Can you clarify, is it like a Girl Scout cookie booth?
It was a Girl Scout cookie
Okay.
booth, yes. Yes, and so we have a policy and an ordinance surrounding use of the park by commercial organizations, but not by nonprofit organizations, so I was struggling.
Not to interrupt you, but I don't think we need a policy on this.
Yeah,
This doesn't seem to be like a ongoing, reoccurring issue.
and as long as
Is
you
it?
have some direction from council on,
Okay.
on this, do we need to make a policy change? 'Cause I think,
Isn't this like the little kids
It
with
is like
lemonade
commercial.
Lemonade
stand?
stand, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
There is a state law on that now.
well, that's what I'm saying. I thought that was already approved under state law, that, you know, you could have kids selling their lemonade, so like
In
Girl
their own,
Scouts selling their
in your-
cookies.
in
the
their
park.
own driveway.
It would be in the
That's not a
park.
not
But it seems like it would, the
That's a
park
for-profit.
That's a
would
for-profit.
also,
And this issue, we didn't have to make a decision because the leaseholders had a conflict with it, for the location that they wanted. But it, you know, I think that the handling these things, since they're such one-off things, is better just to handle it with staff discretion on a case-by-case basis.
Got it.
And then we have a commercial policy in place, so
Where did they want
We
to
can
put
do
it?
Did staff feel like,
That's a good idea.
between the pool and the Little League fields.
did staff feel like you were in an
Between,
awkward position, or was there a
I
problem?
struggled a little bit with process on how to approve or deny their request, but going to the lessee makes the most sense. Make sure we're not conflicting with them. So
but
I
they
think
weren't gonna put it on the ball fields, right?
No.
So where were they gonna
in the
put it?
parking area.
parking area,
They were gonna put the booth in the parking lot?
I believe so. And then the
That
time
doesn't seem like a
it was
safe place to
it was
put
almost
in the
6
first place.
weeks of cookie operation.
Saturday and Sunday all day, yeah.
Well, and
It was serious.
the way that Girl Scouts does it is they have a booth lottery, so it wouldn't even be necessarily kids from Rollingwood. It would be whoever won the lottery for that place. And so, not that I'm selling cookies for
Seem
both
well
of my
informed.
girls and see, you know, but I think, but I think whether or not it's Girl Scouts being there or another for-profit thing set up for 6 weeks, we just have to look at it. We're never gonna have an ordinance that covers every situation, but commercial use is covered.
I'm
And
fine
that's
with that.
commercial use, and then it's also leased
Well, couldn't
by-
you always bring it before, like, if you felt like you were in an awkward position, you
Yeah,
could always
bring
bring
it.
it
Yeah.
before us.
If you're not sure,
Yep.
bring it back and, you know,
I will do that. That's perfect.
I think you handled it well, so thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, no action on item 13. On to item 14, discussion and possible action on an ordinance to amend the city's code of ordinances, section 12.08.003, regarding the issuance, renewal, suspension, termination, and revocation of permit agreements for dockless vehicles. Amber?
You gonna do it?
You wanna do it? You want me to do it?
Charlie?
I can do it, doesn't matter.
Charlie?
So, a perfect example of why I don't like amending things on the fly, when we amended the dockless bicycle ordinance on the fly and changed it from I believe it was the chief of police handling it to the city administrator, we missed the fact that if the chief of police, the decision made by the chief of police wasn't appropriate, they could appeal it to the city administrator. And so now we had an ordinance that appeals from the city administrator would be made to the city administrator. So we're changing this so that appeals from the city administrator are made to city council. It's just a cleanup from something that we missed when we made the change last time.
Excellent explanation. Sounds straightforward. Do I have a motion?
I have this as Amy's motion.
like, I move to approve the ordinance to amend the city's code of ordinances, section 12.08.003 regarding the issuance, renewal, suspension, termination, and revocation of permit agreements for dockless vehicles.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Is there discussion? Excellent. All right. Have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed say no. Motion carries. Moving on to item number 15, discussion and possible action on RFQ for engineering services. Amber?
Just a request to go out for RFQ for city engineer. Their contract is older than 5 years, and so they're next on deck.
I move to authorize the city administrator to issue an RFQ for engineering services.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Is there discussion? Man, this is great.
No, we're ready.
There's no discussion. Motion and a second. All those in favor say
Aye.
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 Aye. All those opposed say no. Motion carries. Moving on to item number 16, discussion and possible action to reschedule the March city council meeting.
I prefer March 25th.
Just jump right in. Gotta get your
I also have a preference for March 25th if we're looking at Wednesdays.
Oh, rolling corn here. All right, what are you saying, March 25th?
Do we have a jury trial scheduled?
Oh,
We have court scheduled. But we could do the 24th. I could do the 11th or the 24th.
I'm out the week of the 24th, but don't wait on me if you can all do it.
I'm out the 11th.
I'm out the 18th.
Oh, wait. What did we
That's
say,
spring
March
break.
20? Oh, wait, no, never mind, I can do the 24th or 25th.
Can we figure it out at next month's meeting? Because I don't have like baseball schedules and basketball schedules and all that stuff yet,
Sure.
which I will have.
If you all want to email maybe a couple of preferences to Ashley, and then we could kind of.
I have 0 right now because availability because I can't commit to anything until I know.
But you know you're gonna be gone.
Got it.
He knows who the boss of the house is, too.
Cause it's on spring break and everything.
So I'm guessing the week that it's scheduled
I'm
is
gonna be
spring break?
drafting
break.
policy.
Okay.
I'm gonna be really busy.
Okay, so what do we want to do? Do we want to take no action on
Punt until next week,
punt until,
next month.
okay.
Next month, bring it back next month.
All right, no action, and Amber will work on getting some options for next time. Moving on to item number 17, discussion and possible action to review applications and make appointment to the Parks Commission, Utility Commission, RCDC, Planning and Zoning Commission, and the Board of Adjustment. And I believe that we have no current applications, is that correct?
Correct.
So no action to be taken. Moving on to item number 18, discussion and possible action on the city's response to Trail of Lights. And who's handling this?
I can give a quick, and Chief too. So Buck and I and Amber and Chief and Ashley met to we just wanted to give a brief update. We met and talked about some of the issues that came up with Trail of Lights and put together a couple of action items that we're gonna work on moving forward. Communicating a little bit differently with that festival organizer, and also looking at potentially what adjustments we might want to make to our ordinances regarding parking, because right now our ordinance is for our parking really center only on ACL, and we may want to consider updating them to also allow for some greater discretion during Blues on the Green and also during Trail of Lights. So there's some ordinance things that we may be looking at, and then also interacting with the city of Austin to get some meetings set up a little bit earlier regarding all of the events and get the chief integrated in that. But also just wanted to give an opportunity for any other thoughts that people have on things that we should be working on regarding Trail of Lights that you may have noticed that weren't already discussed in December.
I just want to comment that I appreciate the chief and our 2 police liaisons and our city staff in coming together and finding a solution for that so quickly that seemed to be really impactful to the traffic and to the neighbors, because I had to talk on the phone a lot. And I really appreciate y'all taking care of it so quickly. Good job.
Chief, do you have anything to add?
No, I think we've pretty much covered it all, unless there's some questions.
So it wasn't a parking issue so much as it was just a directing traffic through Rollingwood, right?
It was parking too. Parking on that Saturday night was backed up all the way past Hatley Park. I have video of it all.
Did they change something?
On Rollingwood Drive
They were
or
parking
on
on
Hatley or on?
Rollingwood Drive. Then they started parking everywhere after that.
Okay.
It was crazy.
What did they change?
They
So-
allowed parking.
There's several things that
There's a bunch of contributing
yeah,
factors.
one of them is the parking lot there on Stratford that colloquially I've heard that Saturday and Sunday night they were giving sponsors a lot of parking passes for that lot.
Pushed everybody.
So there was a significant increase in the number of cars that were actually coming to go into that parking lot. it was, both of those nights were free nights, so they were heavy in volume. And then, the other thing was that earlier in the week, anybody who showed up with any kind of parking pass was being allowed to then go and park in the Stratford lot, rather than being redirected to the lot that they had bought the parking pass for.
They had a small VIP valet parking area, and then everything else was allowed to be parked for
Yeah.
regular parking
So
passes.
there was just a significant increase in the number of cars that were being parked there, for multiple nights in a row before we took a position. That intersection was being used as a de facto drop-off point for all of the rideshare as well. So I went and stood there, and it was crazy. I mean, there were just pedestrians coming from all different directions, cars turning all different directions, one police officer and one volunteer. And it was not a safe situation at all.
Have they been responsive since we,
They added some additional personnel. They added a turn channel with cones. And then I think that, I still think that they presented the ideas they had, but we also had to say, we're just gonna start closing our streets. And so I think that was, having the barricades and just saying this is no longer a route was helpful. And then I think, Amber putting the information to Google so that also on the maps that it showed that it was no longer a route that could be taken, that was helpful. So that's when we had Candy Cane Lane. Yeah, if you looked at your Google map after.
I just asked her how she needed to do that. She
The
gave me
amount of
guidance, so.
people
Yeah.
that they had at the event on that Saturday and Sunday was way more than that they could handle. By, I don't know by how many thousands, but it was in the thousands. It was crazy. I was personally there on Saturday night, and when I left, it was,
I boycott.
I mean, there are so many issues with what was going on from a public safety standpoint that are really serious issues in the grand scheme of things. I mean, the world we live in today.
Okay, is there any action to take?
There's no action. We just wanted to give since it was something that I know probably everybody got phone calls about, and wanted to just update that we've met and are starting to look at how we can adjust as in our response as a city, and then also think about collecting input from people. We wanted to make sure we did that and collected comments from the council.
It seems like they need to have an earlier screening point instead of making the traffic come all the way down to Riley before they were checking and see if you could go in or not. Because by then, the only way for them to get out is to go into Rollingwood. But if instead they had the screening point, Redbud would be ideal, but that would be difficult. But they could at least have it there at,
Ridgewood?
yes, at Ridgewood.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you did it that way, then you could direct
Screening
people
point.
down Ridgewood and back out to Bee Caves, and they wouldn't have to go all the way through all the way through Rollingwood to get out.
And they made them where they had the U-turn there and go back out, cause we closed.
After we
Riley.
closed the street, then they had to create a U-turn instead of letting people turn in, and then they were also.
Surely it's on their to-do list to change.
Surely, there's some issues there. I think, the residents there in the city of Austin also have some power that they seem to have not exercised in the past. And it didn't seem like, I was hearing actually from people who were working the intersection there that there were neighbors in the city of Austin who were really not happy. So,
Okay.
surely.
Okay, no action to
Okay.
be taken. Is there any other discussion on 18? Moving on to item number 19, our standing agenda item, update, discussion, and possible action to pass a resolution to request a meeting with provide information or statement of position, City of Austin, request information or analysis from relevant state and local officials in connection with the South Mopac expansion. Amy?
Yes. Okay, so we have a better timeline that Wendy went through and made it color-coded for everybody. I put it together and then she made it where everyone else would understand it, not just me. So the blue section on the bottom is Mopac. The only significant updates from when we looked at this last time are that we do have our meeting scheduled now with CTRMA Wendy, myself, Amber, the mayor on the 30th. I've talked with other council members in Austin, and they are also receiving briefings within the next week or so. It's unclear exactly what we're going to be briefed on. There are also no dates yet announced for the open house period on MOPAC South. So hopefully by next meeting, we will have more information.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else?
I like the timeline. It's helpful because there's a lot of overlapping.
Mm-hmm.
This helps you to see that we're going to be in the middle of bee caves and MOPAC at the same time at some points.
Okay. All right, if there's nothing further on item number 19, we'll move on to item number 20, all things related to the Bee Caves Improvement Project. Amy?
Yes. So the significant updates on this is that at the Transportation Policy Board meeting, or in the packet that came out, we can now see that the Bee Caves project does appear in the list of projects under consideration for the 2045 plan. One comment I'll just make in case anybody decides to use anything else with this map is that in that second box that's dated January 13th, 2020, the word illustrative shouldn't be in there. So there is a list now of all the projects that were submitted. There were 642 projects submitted. So if you're interested in seeing that, I can send it to you. One thing I would say of note from the Transportation Policy Board meeting is that apparently the city of Austin submitted multiple bridge projects that were not included. And one of them is the Redbud Bridge improvement. So I'm still doing some follow-up on that.
Have you talked to Wesley Hills about that yet?
I haven't had a chance yet, but hopefully I'll be
They'll
able
be
to
really
talk to
concerned.
Linda, yeah. So where we are right now is they published all the projects. They showed which ones were being considered to be constrained and which ones were illustrative. Our project is in the potential constrained. So on January 27th, for that meeting, at some point in time before it, we'll get a list of now the scoring for the projects and which ones they're saying will actually be constrained. Haven't seen it yet. So that's what I'm waiting to see next. And then they still haven't announced the dates for the public comment period, but we know it will be February to March of some time. I think that once we see whether our project, like how our project scores, then at the next meeting we can talk about what type of public comment we may want to encourage our residents to make and what type of comment we may want to make as a council.
Do you feel like we're in a better position than we were last time on the scoring portion?
I would hope so, because the last time the project application didn't include most of the project description. Like it was missing a lot of the key elements to the project itself, and we didn't see it before it went in. So we also were not provided a copy this time, despite I know Amber hounding them to see the project finalized before it was submitted. So I don't know what was submitted again, but
So
but we do
who
have
put
it
it together?
So TxDOT put it together, and we saw the first draft. So I feel like at least as far as what we saw in the first draft, we're in a better position
And
as
then
far as the description.
we also supplemented narrative
Mhm.
portions, so we're hopeful that they included those.
Yes.
We worked really
So
hard
they
on
put the
those.
project together and then they decide which projects they're gonna approve?
Well, TxDOT put the project application together. Campo decides which projects get put in the constrained portion.
We have to
So-
co-sponsor with TxDOT in order to get it into the regional transportation plan.
And they're gonna pay
Yeah,
for it too.
and so they submit it as a co-sponsor with the city of Rollingwood, so they submit it for us.
Right, yeah, but it really seems like we should be able to see what is being submitted on our behalf before it goes in.
I will say that both Amber and I were really trying to get answers for that this time, and thought we had a confirmation of when we were going to get to see the draft, and then literally radio silence. So we don't know. I'm hopeful we can see the draft at some point, just so that we know what the baseline was. what we were working from. Or what was submitted. We saw the draft, we didn't see what was finally submitted. So at least from what the draft showed, if it was just the draft submitted, we were still in a better position as far as the application and the description than we were the previous time.
But it didn't
Mhm.
include, we asked them to include the additional narratives.
Right,
and
we
so
don't
we're
know
not sure whether or not.
That was included. So, we'll get the scoring at some time before the January 27th meeting. The next meeting, hopefully I'll be able to come back with some information. And, I think that's it on that issue.
Okay. Anything else from anyone? All right, no action to be taken on item number 20. And we will move on to our mayor and department reports are all available to you. And I think that's it. Do I have a motion?
I move to adjourn.
I have a motion. I don't think it requires a second, actually. All those in favor say aye.
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 8:56.
Yes!
Yeah, baby.